All right. All right, we're starting. Hello, my name is Joe Hernandez, and I am the facilitator for this week's discussion on Genie, the TLC documentary. So thank you all for taking part of this session, and I just have a couple questions on what you think about the video that you just saw. So the question that the question that we were given is that the case of children raised without human interaction suggests that human interaction is essential for language to development. What does that mean? Or what do you think it means?
I'll go ahead. I've seen this video a few times before. I think in undergraduate classes, I've seen this in language development classes. And so I remembered I wasn't that surprised by what I saw this week. But I agree that it's obvious through Genie that if your brain's not stimulated, if you don't hear language, that does have an effect. And like we tell our parents now of our students that they just need to speak to them. They need to have like books and print and text, like even environmental text. Just seeing those words and hearing the words and stuff has an effect on their reading and their brain development. So going off of what the people in the video were saying, I agree that Genie does not have an intellectual disability. She was not born with a disability or anything, that it was just her environment that altered her brain, and her left side of her brain didn't develop. So it's not a disability in that sense, but it's more just like the trauma and the environmental situation that she was in.
Yeah, I like how you brought up about trauma, Sarah, because trauma affects a lot of individuals, and it can affect us in many ways. I recently just took a course for my graduate level area, my graduate courses, and we talked about trauma a lot, and it affects how one lives socially, emotionally, physically, everything. And I really liked learning about it, because how we are exposed to it can reflect on what we're doing right now. I also like what you brought up about how it can also relate to our upbringing. Because I took a human behavior course in my undergrad, and they said the number of words that newborns learn by the age of 3 is 35,000. So does anyone else have any opinions to social interaction?
I thought it was I also saw that video before, and it's horrible what Jeannie went through, and I agree that human interaction is really important to develop language, and she was prevented she was prevented from learning those early communication patterns, just being isolated and being severely affected. So I think her isolation prevented her from acquiring language. It wasn't just that she had an intellectual disability. I don't think she had one based on that video. It didn't seem like it, but she was prevented from acquiring language just because of her isolation.
Mm-hmm.
It shows a real case of nature versus nurture, and that idea that she wasn't nurtured, and that in order to learn language, learning language is a social behavior. It's learned through social interaction, and it really showed that her lack of being nurtured and having those social interactions really kept her from learning language, I think. It was a very sad video. That's the first time I think I saw that, but it is really scary to think of that there's people out there that actually do those kind of things to children, no less. But and I agree with both of you that already spoke that I don't think she has an intellectual disability. I think it is that lack of interaction that prevented her from learning language and more.
Right.
Yeah, I also believe that, because that was my first time seeing the video too, and they said that her room that she was in, it was like a blacked out room. And I think also along with language, just environmental stimulus, environmental stimuli, as infants and toddlers, I feel like humans look around and they see things, and then they kind of make their own thoughts and feelings about how those things make them think and feel. So I feel like if she didn't really have much to look at or, kind of just observe, that also affected her development as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you're bringing up how she's being raised. Because imagine this: it's 1957, I believe, way before intellectual disabilities or any form of disability was coming in. She's mostly in her house. If not, she's there and not even taken out. It's dark. There's no sunlight coming in. Neighbors are not even aware of what's going on. And they live and some of them who live right next door didn't even know that Genie was there. And Samantha, excuse me, I like how you brought up stimulus, because I saw a quote from the video. I'll read it to you. The child's brain learns certain things at certain times. In this point, the critical periods such as language. Without stimulus, their brains are smaller and malformed. If neglect or abuse continues, the brains will not reach the same development, and such as others who do not experience those conditions. Genie was unable to learn and not develop the same capacity of living. And when they found out about when she was brought in, she didn't speak anything. And when she was brought in, like, they wanted to see if she can still learn only at the age of 13, because like I said earlier, she's been stuck in that room and stuck in that house for a really long time with no interaction from her dad, her mom, who also left the family, and also the brother too.
I thought it was interesting that she was quickly able to learn words, and that really, all the researchers and psychologists jumped on her, because you don't have a child like that very often.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into that ethical issue later, but so there was that Lindenberg theory that you can only learn up until, like, there's critical periods of learning.
Yeah.
And she was able to kind of debunk the idea that you can't learn language up to a certain point by learning all those words. But then it was interesting that she stopped short of being able to put it together grammatically. So it's interesting, the different parts of the brain, like one part allowed her to learn all those words, but the part that then helps you string it together to make a sentence was too damaged to repair, I guess. I don't know. I thought that was interesting where the learning stopped.
And sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Go ahead. You're good.
I was going to say, it's interesting about the trauma. I work in an inner city school where all the kids pretty much have trauma, like the environment that we're in. And so it's interesting to me that when she started learning, like you said, Erin, like she's like a sponge, like kids, they just soak it all in. She knew it. But then when she went back to live with her mom again in that house, the trauma just resurfaced again, and she lost all ability. Like she just completely went downhill. So it's interesting to imagine, like, what if the state didn't take over and she was allowed to stay with her therapist for care, because she was there for foster care. Like, what if she didn't get taken away? If the mom wasn't mad about all of this, all of a sudden, who knows where she could be today? Instead of being in like an adult living center, she could be living by herself or having a job. It's the trauma of it all, like of the damage to the brain and how the brain just completely shut down when she went back to that place is fascinating. I mean, it's terrible, but it's really interesting.
It is interesting to think about the brain and how you learn language, but then also the brain and what happened to her brain emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she learned all that language, like you said, but being back in that home, that emotional, like curing her, like fixing her brain emotionally, and those pieces weren't up to par. So yeah, the trauma just kind of probably kicked all in again when she went home with her mom.
Right. It's like the hierarchy of needs. Like if her basic needs aren't met, she's not going to be able to learn. So if she's not feeling safe or secure or loved, like she's not going to be able to get to that part.
It went out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also the trigger, because when she's at home, that's considered a trigger, because that's where everything took place.
Right.
Yeah, I was very surprised they put her back into her family's house, like, after that. I mean, that's just horrible. speaking of ethical issues, that's I can't believe it. So
yeah, I was wondering that too. Like, how was that even able to happen? But then I thought about it. She was already 18, so I guess mom was allowed to have her back, even though mom was charged and convicted and everything.
Yeah, I want to talk about that part because that is an ethical issue, because the age that we're considered to be independent is when we're 18. This is, again, in 1957. And, this is like 1960s or whatever.
I think it was 1970 when they found her.
Okay. So we'll say the 70s, and she's 18. So how do you feel, if it's present time, she would be considered independent? What do you think the state would have done in that situation?
But the state didn't have any say, though, because her legal guardian took her back. So the state can't really, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't the mom, that it was the dad that was doing everything. Like, the mom didn't have any control and stuff. So it's, I don't know. It's kind of like a.
Well, there's definitely ethical issues going on there. I mean, she was exploited. They wanted her for research, and I think that went above her welfare. A lot of them made a lot of gains financially and within their professions by working with her, and they definitely showed care for her. But then she started going from like one professional to living with another professional. And then that kind of blurs lines of, is that a foster parent to them, or is that her psychologist?
Yeah, crossing boundaries.
Right. The consistency in trauma care is so important.
And then, like, even though the mother had problems, it's still the mother. So I know from the state, it's like, well, that mother is still her mother, even though you might, so I think that gets really confusing too. Because in a lot of ways, the parents have that first say, but when it's a parent that's not really capable, I don't know.
Right.
I think it's a shame for her because she was making progress, and then I don't know that she was a priority anymore. I think, the research became the priority. And then they all started fighting over who should have her.
Yeah.
Right.
And she probably felt that,
Uh-huh.
She felt all of that tension and, probably felt like she didn't really belong anywhere.
Being bounced around
all over the place, and confused because that's her first real exposure to other human beings besides her family.
Yeah, like a real family, even though they weren't her relatives.
Yeah.
They could agree on how to care for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, they were treating her, just to kind of go off what you were saying, Erin, they were treating her like a kind of a science experiment, but also cared for her. It was just, you have to remember that she's still like a child. She still needs like those basic needs, like going off of what Sarah had said earlier. So, really tough situation.
Yeah, I agree with the fact that they kind of saw Genie as a science experiment, because there's a reason why today we see consent and assent. With Genie's case, she only had, like, her dad committed suicide, and her mom, she was out of the picture until she came back home. So it also raises the question, who, like, if it was today, right now, who would give the consent?
Right.
I'm not sure on this. Is when Genie got taken, I know her parents were in custody, and then that's when the dad did all that stuff and everything.
Yeah.
But also the mom was blind. Just let's not forget that part, because that's also another factor in the play of all the care and everything. But
of the state at that point.
Right. So I'm just saying, like, then she would have been taken into foster care. But I know that they said in the movie, the documentary, that the state gave tons of funds to this project all of a sudden, because this is the first kid that they really wanted to learn from. But so it's kind of hard to say, like, what would happen if this were to happen now, because there's a lot of factors at play.
I would hope that more people would step in and not let her become this hot research experiment, but that people would recognize the ethical issues going on and consider her welfare a little more, whoever that might be, whatever organization that would be, I would hope. I don't know.
Right. You think it would be just as beneficial if just that one therapist just like took her in and just observed her and worked with her for a few months and just like told everyone what happened instead of all these tests and all these people and everything going on. But
I wonder, like, if this happened today, what would it be like in trying to teach her language? Because I feel like we have so much more research about how someone learns to read and write and speak. And we have all this technology that, you know, she learned sign language, but she could have learned all this assistive tech that we've been learning about and been available to her. And like, would she continue to make progress much faster instead of kind of stalling out? I don't know, I just think that's an interesting thing to think about.
yeah, and a lot of the research came from the theory that Genie debunked, though. So it's kind of hard to, you know, if it didn't happen back then, what would we still think that she wouldn't be able to now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know I'm planning to be a social worker, and it's a lot for me to take in too, because we have to learn all this. And for everyone else who's working with children, like we have to be aware on who we're working with. We also have to consider the person in the environment as well, and also think about how they got here and if they feel safe enough to disclose this. Now today we're seeing child abuse training. We're seeing so many clearances that we have to do, which is good too, because it shows that one, we have a clean record, and two, that we also have to be aware of these conditions as well. So that is basically my wrapping point. If anyone else has any questions or comments about it.
It was pretty good.
All right. Well, thanks again for taking part of this discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
See ya.